Ever get that feeling you're catching a glimpse behind the curtain, seeing how things really get done?
Yeah.
Well, today we're pulling back that curtain on a brand new tax bill. It's being pushed pretty aggressively, actually, by MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump.
Exactly. And our goal here, in this deep dive is to really get past the headlines.
Right.
We want to understand the nuts and bolts of this proposal, explore the controversies around it, and get a clear picture of what the independent analysis is saying. What are the likely consequences?
And to do that, we've got some pretty interesting source material, excerpts from a Midas Dutch YouTube video transcript. And this isn't just commentary. It apparently includes documented talking points, direct quotes from them, even descriptions of visuals. Helps tell the story.
Yeah, it gives it some context.
Okay, so let's dive in. First up, these alleged talking points. You mentioned there's a photo. Seems to show actual talking points given to MAGA Republicans.
That's right. And what's really fascinating is the strategy here. It looks like a preemptive move. The core message seems to be an effort to, well, discredit the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO.
Okay. Undermine the referee before the game even starts.
Kind of, yeah. They're trying to frame the CBO as like an opponent of President Trump's agenda of conservative reforms. They're saying there's this supposed history of bias.
A bias how?
Well, the talking points claim this bias leads the CBO to overestimate costs when liberals want to spend, but underestimate the benefits, the economic growth, from tax cuts.
Right. So discredit the independent analysis before it even comes out. We've definitely seen that kind of playbook before.
We have.
And you said there are direct quotes from these talking points. What are they actually telling people to say?
Yeah, one is pretty blunt. It says, the Congressional Budget Office is one of President Trump's most powerful opponents in trying to get the one big, beautiful bill through Congress.
One big, beautiful bill. Okay, that phrase sounds familiar.
Definitely. And another one says, this opposition to conservative reforms has a long history at the Congressional Budget Office. When liberals want to spend more, the CBO estimates that it will cost less than it ultimately costs.
And this supposed bias, according to the talking points, it has bigger consequences than just this one bill, right?
Exactly. They're arguing this alleged pro-spending and anti-tax cut bias at the CBO, that it's actually helped fuel government growth, deficits, the national debt over time.
So shift the blame for debt onto the CBO's analysis, not the policies themselves.
This seems to be the narrative they're building.
Yeah.
Focusing on the analysts, not the analysis itself.
Okay, so that's the narrative about the CBO. But isn't there a bit of a twist here? Like some inconsistency when it comes to trusting the CBO? MAGA Mike Johnson, for instance.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It raises questions about consistency. Right now, MAGA Mike Johnson is publicly pretty skeptical of the CBO.
Right.
There's a quote where he says, I don't put a lot of credence in what the Congressional Budget Office says. That's not really something that governs my decisions.
Okay, sounds pretty clear. Dismissive, even.
Very. But if you look back just a little bit, the source material points to a post he made. November 18th, 2021. Back then, he was citing a CBO report, praising it almost.
About what?
About a bill under President Biden. Johnson's post said, now that the CBO has confirmed this bill adds nearly $400 billion to the deficit, contrary to the White House's claim.
Wow. So back then, the CBO was a reliable source confirming something he wanted confirmed.
Exactly. When the CBO's findings lined up with his political argument, it was treated as credible. Now, not so much.
That's quite the contrast. It really suggests the CBO's credibility, in some eyes, depends on whether you like what it says.
It does seem that way. And the source uses an analogy, actually. It compares it to calling the American Bar Association leftist, just because they might offer some objective legal analysis that, doesn't fit a certain political narrative.
Right. Attack the messenger if you don't like the message.
Essentially, yeah. It highlights that strategy of questioning the objective body when its findings are inconvenient.
Definitely makes you think about the motivations there. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the actual concerns about this tax bill's impact, especially on the deficit. The numbers sound pretty big.
Yeah, this is where it gets really critical. We've got multiple nonpartisan sources projecting really substantial deficit increases if this bill passes.
Like who and how much?
Well, the CBO itself, the body they're trying to discredit, is projected to estimate an increase somewhere in the range of $4 trillion, maybe even higher.
$4 to $6 trillion.
Trillion, yeah.
Yeah.
And the Joint Committee on Taxation, they estimate at least $3.7 trillion.
Okay.
And then you have others, like the Tax Foundation and the Penn Wharton Project. Their projections are in the $2.5 to $5.1 trillion range.
Those are just massive figures. Hard to even wrap your head around.
They really are.
It certainly clashes with that big, beautiful bill rhetoric, doesn't it, when the independent analyses point to trillions in new debt?
It absolutely does. And the source material also brings up the context of the previous administration's deficit contribution.
Right. What did that say?
It mentions claims made during a Republican debate, actually, by Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. They stated that Donald Trump added about $8 trillion to the deficit during his term.
$8 trillion?
Yeah, which they claimed was like 25 to 30% of the entire current national debt. So the context is potentially adding trillions more on top of that.
Okay, so if these projections are showing potentially huge deficit increases, why the rush? Why try to push this through so quickly?
Well, the source suggests a key reason is timing. They want to pass the bill before the CBO releases its official score, its official estimate.
Ah, get it done before the potentially damaging numbers become public.
Seems like the idea is to build momentum, yeah.
Yeah.
Secure passage before that independent assessment possibly, complicates things.
Definitely raises eyebrows. And it's not just Democrats raising concerns, is it? You mentioned even within the MAGA Republican group, especially in the Senate, there's some pushback, some disagreements.
Oh, absolutely. The source indicates several MAGA Republican senators are hesitant about the House bill. And beyond that, there are at least 4 major unresolved issues causing a lot of internal friction.
Okay, like what? What are the sticking points?
Well, first, there's the whole issue of Medicaid work requirements, the timeline for those. The far right wants them implemented fast and wants deep cuts, essentially gutting Medicaid.
And the CBO has weighed in on that.
They have. The CBO projects that those kinds of changes could cause 13 to 14 million Americans to lose their health care coverage.
13 to 14 million, that's staggering.
It is. So that's one major fight. And another big one is the Federal Medical Assistance Program, FMAP.
FMAP, remind us what that is.
That's basically the formula that decides how the federal government and states split the costs for Medicaid.
Got it.
And there are big disagreements about the federal share. Plus, there's concern about some states having these trigger laws.
Trigger law?
Yeah, laws that could basically eliminate Medicaid in that state if the federal funding drops below a certain point. So changing FMAP could trigger that.
Wow. Okay. What else? You said 4 issues.
Right. Third is the plan to phase out the green energy tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Okay.
The irony here is that phasing those out could actually lead to significant job losses in red states, states that have actually benefited from investments spurred by those credits.
Huh. So cutting those could hurt their own constituents' jobs. You can see why that would cause tension.
Definitely. And the fourth big sticking point is the SALT deduction cap, state and local taxes.
Ah, SALT. Always controversial.
Always. This cap limits how much people can deduct in state and local taxes from their federal taxes.
Yeah.
And it's creating a big divide, even among MAGA Republicans.
How so?
Between representatives from what they call donor states, states with higher taxes that tend to send more money to Washington, and taker states, which often get more federal funds back.
Right.
Republicans from high-tax states, even conservative ones, are pushing back hard against keeping that cap low. So it's causing fights within the party.
So it sounds like this big, beautiful bill is hitting some serious turbulence, even from its own side.
It really does. And the source mentions the House Freedom Caucus, some of the most conservative members.
Yeah.
Even they're apparently questioning this rush to get it done before Memorial Day. Suggests the support isn't quite unified, even on the hard right.
And meanwhile, Donald Trump himself is planning to get involved directly.
That's what the source indicates. He plans to go to Capitol Hill, apply pressure, tell Republicans to get in line, really emphasizing it's his bill, my big, beautiful bill.
It's definitely heating up. But it's not just internal Republican fights. Democrats are obviously raising major alarms, too.
Oh, absolutely. Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern, for instance, is being very critical. He's questioning why they're scheduling votes late at night.
Suggesting they're trying to hide something.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He's quoted saying, "If Trump's big, beautiful bill is so great, why not debate it when people are still awake?" And he added basically that they just want members to close your eyes and vote for it.
Strong words. He
Really?
clearly views the bill very negatively.
Extremely. McGovern calls it a massive scam, a historic tax cut to billionaires paid for by stealing from the American people. He accuses it of ripping away Medicaid and food assistance. Starkly different view.
And these concerns, especially about debt and health care, they're being echoed by some Republican senators, too, right?
Yes, that's crucial. You've got figures like Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, Susan Collins expressing resistance.
What are they saying?
Well, Rand Paul is quoted focusing on the debt increase. He said something like, "I don't think people who voted for President Trump thought that we would continue spending at President Biden's levels. My objection is still raising the debt ceiling by either $4 or $5 trillion."
Okay, focused on the spending aspect. What about Collins?
Susan Collins honed in on the healthcare cuts. She said, "It is wrong to cut healthcare for the working poor, and that's what we're talking about here with Medicaid." Pretty direct.
So, real bipartisan concern, it seems, about the potential downsides. And didn't Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle also weigh in with some figures?
He did. Boyle called it a big bill for billionaires, and he specifically mentioned the CBO's finding, again, that 13.7 million Americans could lose health care.
Wow.
His quote was something like, "It's the biggest tax cuts for billionaires in American history, paid for by throwing 13.7 million Americans off their health care coverage." And even Republican Senator Josh Hawley apparently called the bill morally wrong.
Morally wrong. From a Republican senator. That's significant.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Democrats are trying to frame this by saying, look, we tried to protect most people. They say they proposed amendments to keep the tax cuts for anyone earning under, like, $1 billion a year, which is almost everybody.
Right.
But they say Republicans voted those amendments down. So the Democratic argument is, this proves the bill's real focus is tax cuts for the absolute wealthiest.
So putting it all together, what's the outlook? The source seems pretty skeptical about this bill's chances, doesn't it?
Yeah, the prediction outlined in the source is that this whole thing could still blow up even in the House.
Yeah.
Because of all these internal fights, especially over Medicaid.
And if it does pass the House?
It's expected to face huge hurdles in the Senate. Major opposition. Plus, you got the debt ceiling deadline looming, which this bill makes even more complicated, potentially forcing another debt limit increase.
Right.
And there's one more sort of technical but important point the source raises about the CBO's analysis.
What's that?
It's about the interest rate the CBO uses in its projections. It might be lower than the actual interest rates the government is paying on its debt right now, the Treasury yields.
Yes. Yeah.
Meaning the actual cost of servicing all this potential new debt could be significantly higher than even these big projections suggest.
Okay, wow. So let's try to wrap this up. Let's synthesize what we've covered in this deep dive. We've looked at this MAGA Republican tax bill, and it's controversial right from the get-go. We saw alleged talking points trying to undermine the CBO's credibility before its analysis.
Right. A seemingly convenient shift in whether or not to trust the CBO based on what it might say.
Exactly. And then these huge potential impacts, multiple nonpartisan sources projecting trillions added to the text.
Trillions. And what's really striking is the internal conflict. Deep divisions within the Republican Party itself over really fundamental things.
Yeah.
Medicaid, green energy jobs, SALT deductions. That internal friction, plus the Democratic opposition, plus skepticism from key Republican senators, it makes the bill's future look really uncertain. And looming over it all is the potential impact on healthcare for millions. That adds a whole other sort of ethical layer.
So the central question really seems to be, is this big, beautiful bill, as they call it, truly going to benefit most Americans? Or is it, mainly helping a very small group at the top?
Right. Possibly at the expense of much higher national debt and maybe gutting programs like Medicaid.
Which brings us to the final point, something for you, the listener, to think about. Given all this, the conflicting info, the talking points, the disputed numbers, the potential consequences, what should you be asking?
Yeah, what questions should you be asking your own representatives about this specific bill? How might it impact your community, your family's health care, the country's financial future?
These seem like the crucial questions to keep asking as this whole debate moves forward.